Hello, everybody. My name is Anil Kumar Rajvanshi. I run a small rural NGO called Nimkar Agriculture Research Institute in Western Maharashtra in a place called Fulton. I work in the areas of renewable energy and I also have interest in spirituality and I have written quite a number of books on them. And what I'm going to talk today about is my seventh book called What is Thought? It is basically nothing else but the neurobiological and physical basis of thought production, transmission, and interaction with matter. And I think it's a very unique things that I'm going to present, and I hope you enjoy listening to this. This book has been written in four sections. The first section is thought, the second section is memory production and removal, the third section is thought transmission, and the final section is interaction of thought with matter. In 2004, I wrote my first book entitled Nature of Human Thought. In it and in subsequent edition, basically the second edition, which I wrote in 2010, I try to cover some ideas on how thought is formed and transmitted. The ideas were speculative in nature, but I tried my best with the knowledge available at the time to explain the mechanism of how thought could be formed in the brain and transmitted. The basic framework was explained, but the details were missing. Since then, I have thought a little more about the subject and I present in this booklet. It is a booklet because it is just 34 page, a possible mechanism of neurobiological and physical basis of thought production and memory formation. And furthermore, a possible mechanism on how it is transmitted and its interaction with matter and gravity. I also speculate on the unexplored possibilities which might provide a detailed mathematical foundation of the nature of individual thought. As we all know that most of us, almost all of us, sometime or the other in our life have gone through the experience of feeling that somebody is following or watching us. Whether it is a human being or an animal, it makes us turn our neck. So, what it is and try to investigate it. Similarly, there have been innumerable instances where people and animals have sensed danger much before it strikes them. What is the nature of that signal that tells our mind that somebody is watching us intently or there is a lurking danger? And how is that signal generated and sent from the pursuer's brain? Or, in other words, what is thought and how it is generated and transmitted? I have been exploring and writing about these issues since 1977, though the desire to understand them started from my childhood. When the age of 13 or 14, I started doing very deep meditation and practicing spirituality in earnest. And these ideas, since 1977, were initially written down in a diary form and then distilled in my first book called Nature of Human Thought, which was published in 2004 and its second edition in 2010. Recently, I have written another book called Exploring the Mind of God: How Technology Guided by Spirituality Can Lead to Happiness, which extends and explores the issues of mind matter interaction further. Again, the details were missing, and so in this booklet, uh, titled What is Thought, I have tried to explain them based on the existing physical laws. Most of the times, scientists scoff at these conjectural ideas and termed them pseudoscience. However, if it in early 1800s somebody had told mankind about Einstein's theory of relativity and space-time continuum, people would have had the same reaction as today's so-called hardcore scientists have about mind matter subjects. I believe that the black magic of today is often the science of tomorrow. The spirit of science encourages us to conjecture and our imagination to flower, and the only validity of such conjectures is the proof from experiments. It is my firm belief that we should have an open mind about mind matter interaction and try to figure out how it could be possible. And therefore, this booklet is for those readers who have an open mind about such possibilities. So, the structure of the booklet is as follows. The booklet is divided into four sections. The first section deals with thought production, a novel concept of thought as a hologram based on biophotons production in the synaptic cleft has been introduced and developed. The second section talks about the nature of memory, its production, its possible location in the brain and outside it, and some possible mechanism of its removal. The third section talks about how thought can be transmitted from the brain and what laws could make it happen. Connected with this is the process of knowledge perception, where the novel concept of quantum entanglement is used to describe it. And finally, the last section is about how human thought could interact with matter and gravity. In the ultimate analysis, this interaction with gravity may allow us eventually to get out of the gravity field. Some speculative ideas on how it may happen, based on the concept of deep thought as a soliton, are explored in this section. All the references to research articles are given as links in the text, and in this podcast, the description provides the uh, link to the book, and the listeners, are requested to please look at this link so that you can access the research articles. I have been working on the subject of what is thought on and off for the last 50 years. The trigger was a certain idea that came to me in 1977 that human thought and gravity are related. This happened in Gainesville, Florida, where I was deeply involved in my PhD work at University of Florida, and this work was on solar energy, and the idea of gravity was as far removed from my mind as the earth from the sun. Yet, this sudden and unexpected idea was so powerful that it caught hold of my mind for the next 4 to 5 months, and I could hardly concentrate on anything else. Since this idea came so suddenly and powerfully, I was convinced that it was true, otherwise, it would not have come. In 1981, I came back to India to work on the rural development in our small NGO called Nimkar Agriculture Research Institute, and so I could not focus on mind matter and spirituality matters. And I therefore could only take up seriously the matter of spirituality and understanding of human thought in early 2000. I am always reminded of Einstein's words of wisdom, where he said that for somebody to do deep thinking on any issue, he should lock himself in a lighthouse. With no distractions, the focus is achieved. My small institute is my lighthouse, and I feel very blessed and grateful to higher powers who have guided me and allowed me to focus on this and other deep issues. And whatever little truth I have been able to glean has given me great joy and happiness. The major source of inspiration for writing this booklet has been Patanjali Yoga Sutras. I have been guided by the spirit of sage Patanjali in the area of human thought and mind matter interaction. The more I study his sutras, the more I realize the ocean of knowledge in his writings. I have made this e-booklet freely available on the net for wider circulation, and also because of my belief that knowledge should be freely available. And this is my seventh book, and for other books authored by me, I would request you to please follow my writing site, and all the links to these sites have been given in the description of this podcast. I am extremely grateful to my wife Nandini Nimkar for editing it, and to my colleague Shri S.S. Rao for typing umpteen drafts. And also special thanks are due to Shri Rahul Pisharodi for designing the cover. So happy listening, and this was the end of preface. Now I'll talk about section 1 of the book called Thought. Almost all of us, sometime or other in our life, have gone through the experience of feeling that somebody is following or watching us. Whether it is a human being or an animal, it makes us turn our neck to see what it is and investigate. Similarly, there have been innumerable instances where people and animals have sensed danger before it strikes them. So, what is the nature of the signal that tells our mind that somebody is watching us intently or there is a lurking danger, and how is that signal generated and sent from the pursuer's brain? Or, in other words, what is thought and how it is generated and transmitted? Since time immemorial, mankind has thought, discussed, and written about the origin of human thought. Religious writings are basically a discussion on it. Perhaps the greatest treatise on it has been Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which to my mind is still one of the most definitive and scientific writings on the control of human thought. Patanjali's book is the oldest book on yoga. It is believed that he wrote this book sometime in 300 BC or even earlier, though there is still dispute about the date. Sage Patanjali defines yoga as a control of thought waves. This is probably the first definition of yoga. He then describes how through yoga one can produce concentration and how this concentrated thought can be used to gain physical and spiritual powers for a person's ultimate enlightenment. Interestingly enough, Sage Patanjali does not address the central question of how and where the thought originates in the brain, but gives details on how to control it for achieving mastery over natural forces. However, recent developments in the brain research make it possible to understand thought, mind, and consciousness. And this is what we have discussed in this book. Generally, human thought has been considered by philosophers, religious leaders, etc., as non material in nature. However, I believe a result, which is a thought, produced by a physical brain has to be physical in nature and should be governed by physical laws. I will therefore attempt to throw light on what these laws could be. Most of the concepts presented here are intuitive in nature with very little mathematical formulation. Scientists have conducted many studies all over the world to find out how the brain works. Magnetic resonance imaging or MRI techniques, which are non-invasive in nature, are normally used in mapping the brain. Recently, scientists have started using functional MRI or called fMRI for sharper images. Thus, fMRI scans are taken of the brain under different stimuli, which show up on the computer screen as maps of liquid or blood flow in the brain. Scientists then say that the maximum place where maximum blood is flowing is the area where thought of a particular nature is generated. Yet no mechanism has been put forward on how thought is produced. So I will now discuss human thought production. It is an accepted fact that a thought is produced when a brain neurons fire. There are close to 80 to 100 billion neurons in the brain. The exact figure is not known. For a simple thought like what is the color of the flower, excuse me, form of a cat or a dog, etc., a small portion of the neurons fire, but in deep concentration, leading to samadhi and sanyam. And Patanjali calls sanyam as a combination of concentration, contemplation on a single subject or object for a very long time. During this process, almost all the neurons fire to produce a deep thought. Thus, the difference between a deep and a shallow thought is its intensity and duration. When neurons fire, they communicate with each other by forming neural pathways. Activation of neural pathways in turn triggers firing of neurons. This activation is triggered either by signals from sense organs or stimulation of certain memory space in the brain. Firing of neurons helps them to communicate with each other. During this communication, electrical signal from a neuron is converted into chemicals or called neurotransmitters and transmitted across the synaptic cleft to another neuron where it is again converted into electrical signal for the onward journey. I have shown in the book the diagrams of synaptic cleft and neurons, and I would urge the listeners to please go to the website of the book and see these diagrams. Synaptic cleft is a tiny space of about 20 nanometers between an axon and a dendrite and is a place where two neurons exchange information via neurotransmitters. A neuron has three parts. At one end is a dendrite, which accepts the neurotransmitters from the other neurons, the central nucleus, which is the heart of neuron, and a long nerve fiber called axon, whose end, or a synapse, releases the neurotransmitters for transmitting to another neuron. A large number of neurons connected like this forms a neural pathway. So why did nature produce this type of diode-based communication system where the electrical signal from the neuron which goes in one direction only is first converted into chemicals, neurotransmitters, and transmitted through the synaptic cleft and again converted back into the electrical signal in the next neuron? A possible answer could be that during this conversation in synaptic cleft, weak biophotons are produced, which are the signature of thought. This is the central theme of what is thought. Anytime a chemical reaction takes place and the production of neurotransmitters and their acceptance in the neurotransmitter receptor in the other neuron are such reaction and they produce weak photons. This is the nature of the chemical bond. Anytime a reaction takes place, weak photons are produced. Weak photon production was experimentally observed in the brain in the late 2010s when scientists detected them being emitted during the firing of neurons and transfer of neurotransmitters across the synaptic cleft. Scientists were still not sure on what way the brain uses these photons, but speculated that somehow they may help in increasing the communication between various parts of the brain. The weak photons produced have broad spectrum in the range of 200 to 950 nanometer, though we are not yet sure what is the peak of the emission. In this range, the cerebrospinal fluid, which covers the whole brain and is also between the synapse and every part, is 99% water, is nearly transparent. Thus, the biophotons can easily communicate with each other across the brain. I conjecture that these photons from large number of neural pathways synchronize via a nonlinear process to form a three-dimensional hologram which we can call thought. Hence, the origin of thought probably occurs in synaptic clefts. Each thought, however, is a result of activation of a unique set of neural pathways, though we still do not know how many neural pathways are needed for it. In fact, the formation of such a unique neural pathways is the memory. So, neural pathways are the memory, and the neurons firing in these pathways produce a thought. With practice and constant flow of electrical signals through these neural pathways, memory of that particular object gets strengthened. But how do the photons from millions of synapses synchronize and form a coherent thought? For that, we will have to examine the brain complexity, understand large number mathematics, and possible synchronization mechanism. So I will talk now about the brain complexity and the synchronization of the thought photons. Just to give a sense of complexity of the brain, let us look at the number of possible neural pathways in the brain. There are close to 80 to 100 billion neurons in the brain, and each neuron has many dendrites and axons which connect it to the other neurons. And the recent scientific evidence also suggests that besides neurons, another type of cells called glial cells may also take part in communication. Glial cells outnumber neurons by 9 to 1 and can modify the signals transmitted by each neuron. There are therefore estimates that 10 to the power 15 synapses in the brain may be involved in communication. Thus, the number of different combinations for neural pathways and thought production are mind-boggling. That is the reason why human mind can generate millions and zillions of thoughts. However, the thoughts from each synapse must be synchronized with others to produce a stable thought structure. This synchronization takes place via the positive feedback type mechanism so that each photon is influenced by others and is guided by an entity called I, or also called ego, will, sense of identity, etc. etc. This is similar to the mechanism where fireflies in large numbers synchronize their firing when they are together. I conjecture that this type of synchronization might produce a hologram or a thought hologram. Ego acts like a symphony director and helps provide the necessary energy and focus to maintain a given thought for a certain time. It is also constantly compares it with the signals from outside, those we receive through our senses, to give us a sense of reality. We still do not completely understand how ego or I can influence this process, but just like the music conductor who determines which part of the orchestra plays for how long, the ego or I decides how long a particular thought will remain in the vision field. This process is called concentration and seems to also exist in other animals. With practice, concentration becomes strong till a person can nearly make all 80 to 100 billion neurons fire in a laser like fashion for a long time on a single thought. This is the genesis of meditation or samadhi and results in Sanyam, according to sage Patanjali. According to him, Sanyam done on any subject results in his complete knowledge. Thus, deep concentration is the basis by which all great discoveries in science, art, and any other human endeavor are made. This deep thought produced continuously also helps in dissolving the memory knots of the brain, since this activity requires increased number of neural pathways for its processing and hence loosening of the existing memories. We'll discuss this in details in the next section or the section 2. Patanjali also says that removing of memory knots or sanskars as he calls them makes the mind like a crystal so that any object or subject occupies the whole brain when we are thinking about it. Or, in other words, when memory knots are resolved, the processing power of the brain increases exponentially and allows the brain to focus on a single object or subject in a laser like manner. Hence, the reference to crystal like clarity of the brain. The production of weak photons for thought formation could also be the reason why many yogis have experienced seeing white light during intense meditation. Similarly, the observation of white light by persons during near death experience or NDE could be an outcome of nearly all the brain neurons firing during the final exit. As I have shown that that this is a general mechanism of how a thought could be formed. However, there are unexplored possibilities, and we have not been able to provide a detailed mathematical formulation for thought formation. And so here are some of the unexplored and speculative possibilities which can give a mathematical formulation for the thought production. So number one, we still do not know how many neurotransmitters are released per firing of neuron. There are speculations that it is anywhere between 2 and 20, but we do not know. Also, the molecular structure of each neurotransmitter and the receptor is not fully understood. Besides, how many of these neurotransmitters are captured by receptors of the next neuron is also not known. And the problem is compounded by the fact that we do not have the technology to see the real time happenings in the synapse, which I showed is 20 nanometers only. And so, till we know what exactly is happening, these are all speculations. However, if we can find the number of neurotransmitters released and their capture by receptors, then the energy and frequency of biophotons can be calculated and a possible hologram could be created from this data. That, to my mind, will be the first attempt on calculating the structure of a single